Hi, Trudi. Nice to see you.
Hi. You too.
I hope you are doing well under the circumstances. Do you have more time for writing now?
Theoretically, I would have if I was actually writing. I'm taking a big break at the moment. I'm taking a bit of a rest from things. I had some problems with my back and with my hands, so giving them a good long rest.
Okay, and how's the situation in Australia?
Australia's actually done very well so far. We pretty much went straight into full lockdown and controlled the spread of the virus. There are still a few hotspots, but we've avoided a lot of casualties and infections. So now we're sort of relaxing, and everyone's a bit worried that there'll be a second wave, but we'll just have to see.
And you were supposed to come to Poland this spring, but obviously the coronavirus madness ruined these plans. So do you, as a writer, miss direct face-to-face contact with your readers, or is that something that you can easily do without?
I don't necessarily need it, but I like it, and I'm sure they like to meet me as well. It's one of my favorite things when I'm release a book, or even between releasing books, is to actually meet the fans and talk to them and have conversations about the stories and the characters and writing in general. And yeah, it's good to put the face to the name. You don't tend to get that. So in a situation, they'll get my face, but I don't really get theirs, if you know what I mean. Like I don't get to interact with them very much.
But today we will also have some questions from your fans, from the readers. I will ask them later. So obviously, for people who read previous 3 Millenniums Rule books, buying Makers Curse, it's a no-brainer. But what would you say to those who are still thinking which fantasy novel to pick next? How would you encourage a potential reader to read Millenniums Rule?
Okay. So start with the beginning of the series. Well, Thief's Magic for me was a bit like a archaeological Raiders of the Lost Ark romp with epic fantasy elements as well. And I had so much fun writing that book, and my intention was that the readers would have a great deal of fun as well. If you like fantasy that's centered around the possibilities of magic, mainly, you'd probably like my books, because I'm really into the magic systems and building a magic system and having rules and exploring the possibilities of what if magic existed, how would that affect the way societies developed, and how would that change a character's life.
Yes, and in Millenniums Rule, you have invented and developed a completely new fantasy setting. So do you have your own rules for world building?
In general, I do. I have what I call my 3 rules of world building, and the first one is obey the laws of physics. And what that means is everything should be as it is in this world, except for the fantasy elements. And this is interesting because it's my second series, The Age of the Five. I had a pair of characters who were conjoined twins and separated, and you sort of meet them after they've been separated, and one was male, one was female. And I hadn't done my research and didn't realize that, of course, if you've got conjoined twins, they have to be the same gender. So, so I was not obeying the laws of physics, but actually magic provided the magic already existed in that world, that a person could actually change their looks and their age and things like that if they were strong enough. So these two were known as immortals, of a certain set of sorcerers known as the immortals. And so I simply had one of them change gender. And I actually regret the fact that there wasn't more room to explore those 2 characters, because they would have been fascinating to write. I've always wanted to go back and write a little short story or something about their lives. So that's the first rule. The second rule is if you do stray from laws of physics, make sure you've got a fantasy explanation for it. Well, that example is good. The third rule is there are some things you don't have to explain. So, if you've got flying horses, you don't need to give them, anti-gravity horseshoes or saddles or anything, because they wouldn't have evolved the ability to fly if winged horses wouldn't have developed the ability to fly if it didn't work. So you don't need to add extra things. There are some things we actually just accept as a given, that the dragons, they work a certain way, and a cup of immortality works a certain way. You don't necessarily have to go into really, really fine details, because sometimes you go too far and it sounds a bit naff. So that's my third rule.
And so that might be a great moment to ask a question from a reader, from Eunice Evans. So did you have a specific country or a continent in mind while creating Curalia in the Black Magician trilogy?
Actually, I have a policy there. I never actually base any of my worlds upon anything in this world exactly. I get inspired by them. So with Curalia, it was sort of a mix between Victorian. It's probably less than earlier than Victorian. So imagine Victorian world where gunpowder and steam didn't exist, but it was still you have that sort of more sophisticated than medieval sort of societal structure. But I also was really inspired by Japan. So there's some little bits of Japanese sort of technology and cultural things that I grabbed from that as well. And I kind of mixed them together to get a certain feel of a certain level of technological development and societal development, but never anything specific taken from anything. I suppose the closest I've come to is in the Millenniums Rule series. There is Tyen's world is very Victorian London, but more in the terms of magic has replaced steam.
So I've been wondering if a story, is it that the story has to fit the boundaries of the world you create, or do you create a setting that would work best with the narrative you have in mind?
I think for me, the magic actually comes first. So it's almost like a subset of the world and setting that comes first. And then I think if magic worked in a certain way, how would that affect the way people were, be it the whole society or the individual in their society, how that would affect them. So in the Black Magician trilogy, the idea was the magic was latent and someone had to bring that magic out. So the people who teach are obviously very, very powerful, and eventually they form a guild and they control who learns magic. So, of course, the obvious thing to do then is to have someone come along whose magic isn't latent, who comes out naturally. So that messes up the system. In the Age of the Five, it was sort of the opposite. Magic was actually outside of people. So it wasn't latent within them. It was actually something that was in the world, imbued in the world. And everyone could use magic, but most people could only do something like light a flame or, move an object a little bit. But the fun thing I had in that scenario was that the plants and animals also used magic. But my rule was it had to be for the three needs of living things, which is to fight, flight, and breeding. So, if a plant used, there was one plant that used magic to lull people to sleep so that they'd fall down and die and then rot away, and the plant used the nutrients. And there were other animals that had things that they used the magic for to attract a mate. So in the Millenniums Rule series, different again, the magic imbues worlds, but it's a person's reach that limits how much they can actually use. So if the person can reach a long way to pull that magic back to them, they're actually really, really powerful. But if they've only got a short reach, they can only use a small amount of magic. But because it's a multiple world scenario, if they go to a different world and that world has a lesser or more amount of power, that limits how much magic they actually can use. So they can be quite powerful sorcerer in one world and quite weak in another.
That's a very interesting concept. I mean, many people who are not fantasy readers, they associate magic with, flying and fireballs and all this simple cinematic stuff.
Magic wands and spells and things like that. Yeah, I like magic to be more like an electrical force field that people can actually make use of. So I don't sort of go along the lines of magic is this sort of gift that's given to someone, but there's that penalty, like it ages them fast or anything like that. For me, it's just something that certain people have the ability to draw upon. It's like a talent or a gift.
Is it a science as well?
Yeah, I like it to have a certain amount of integrity, so it feels a bit scientific. Well, obviously it's not scientific, but it feels like it has rules that limit what people can do. You don't want necessarily people to be able to do everything, otherwise there's going to be no plot, no conflict. So.
Sure. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, Millenniums Rule was supposed to be a trilogy, but now we have 4 books in a series. So how come?
Well, actually, it was always open-ended, and I told my publishers to call it a series just in case. I said, I've got a story for 3, but I know I've got more ideas for more, but I don't know whether that means it's going to be a series or 2 trilogies or what. And by the time I finished the third book, I thought, I haven't really tied off the ends. There's these other ideas I definitely want to fit in, but I think there's only one book's worth. So I just said to them, do you mind if I add another book and make it a quartet? And they went, okay.
Okay, before I go to a different topic, I have one more question from a reader. The nickname is Akarin, and the question: which character from the Black Magician trilogy and later the Traitor Spy trilogy was the most difficult to create and you had to struggle with?
Oh, how about difficult to create? I don't think I had any characters I found difficult, but I do know that Regin initially, in my very first draft of the Black Magician trilogy, because the first permutation was actually just one big book, and then I realized that it would be easily broken up into 3 minor plot conclusions and then one major one. But Regin actually started off, actually no, sorry, Fergan, I'm getting my characters mixed up here. Fergan was actually this really sort of pathetic character, and he wasn't much of a threat at all, and so he's probably the character that changed the most with the rewrites.
And can you possibly explain what you meant by saying, I'm paraphrasing now, that no story is original?
Oh, yeah, I think when you consider how many billions of people have been on the planet and how many millions of those have been writing, I think probably most storylines have been written already, but I don't ever see that as a reason not to write, because every single person has their own unique flavor and way of expressing a story. So, and it's also, there's a bit of a cyclic thing where certain kinds of stories sort of come in fashion and go out of fashion again. So you wait long enough, your story will come back in fashion again if it's not in fashion now.
So is it more about how you write a story and not what you write? Possibly,
yeah. But I mean, you know, what you write can also, sometimes it's a matter of bringing 2 disparate ideas together. The Angel of Storms, which is the second book of the Millenniums Rule trilogy, was originally one separate book on its own with just Brielle as the character. But when I came to, like, I wrote it before Black Magician trilogy was actually published. But when I came to rewrite it and make a series out of it, it wasn't really going anywhere. I didn't quite have it fully fleshed out. And then I had this idea at a convention. I saw a panel about steampunk and all of the other kinds of punk you could have, like Stone Age punk and, you know, electric punk and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, what if you had magic punk? Because magic being the thing I'm really interested in. And the idea of Titan's World, where the machines are run by magic, came. And so I got these 2 very different ideas, but because I had a multiple world scenario, I could have both of them. And then it all just started to just fill in the gaps and become a very rich, really exciting world to start to write.
So from what you're saying, is that the story is not something that is set in stone. It's something very organic that changes a lot during the actual process of writing. Am I right?
Yes and no. I'm more of a planner, so I tend to, in the idea making side, it's all very open and all, But when I actually come to write books, I tend to be a planner. I have everything set out. I know how the plot's going to go. And there's a bit of freedom in there. Like there is some world building that can continue to happen. But I have most of it structured. I like to know how it's going to end before I start.
And I think that your work can be described as progressive in portrayal of certain characters and minorities and societies, I mean, gender-wise, class-wise, and so on. So have you ever encountered any accusations of being, you know, woke or politically correct? Because now it's apparently an insult.
I kind of haven't, no. If anything, the main thing I get is I get a lot of thank yous from people for representing the minority that they may be in. And that is just amazingly flattering. And people say, you've changed my life. And I'm like, you know, it's wonderful. Yeah, because, you know, I go back to that first law of world building, obey the laws of physics, which basically means what's in world around me that I observe ought to be in the books. In the 80s and 90s, the books that I grew up on, you didn't get gay characters. You didn't get very many strong female characters. Or if a female character was strong, she was a warrior woman with a sword. And I thought, well, what? Why do strong female characters have to be warrior women? Why couldn't they be strong in other ways? And I always wanted Princess Leia to be the one with the Force. I thought, you know, the boys just waste those powers, but I reckon she'd be really good with the Force. And a couple of years ago, I actually met Carrie Fisher. and I told her this. I said, I always wanted Princess Leia to have the Force. And she said, you're going to like the new movies.
So did you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We'll talk about Star Wars a little bit later, but I have another question from a fan. The nickname is Zonk. Do you feel more like women creating fantasy, or rather creating women's fantasy?
No, I think I'm pretty much creating fantasy for all. I certainly have noticed at signings and events that I tend to get a really even spread of both male and female readers, and also across the age groups, everything from 7 to 70, I say. It seems to be very universal, and that's kind of what I'm aiming for. I think if you're writing a good story, like that draws you into the character, it doesn't seem to matter whether the characters are male or female. I mean, the Black Edition trilogy had mostly male characters. And in this latest series, I had one female point of view character, one male point of view character. And I was really curious to see if anyone would say it was a book for boys or book for girls, because it's half and half. So.
And in various interviews, you mentioned certain names of your literary masters, like J.R.R. Tolkien or Ursula Le Guin. But which books or authors shaped you as a person when you were growing up, and which influenced you as a writer?
Shaped me as a person?
Yeah.
Gosh,
that might be two different things, I guess.
Yeah, I can tell you what shaped me as a writer. It shaped me as a person. I remember a fantasy series for children called by Lloyd Alexander, and main character's name was Taran, and they actually named a character after Taran in Millenniums Rule. Chronicles of Prydain, I think it was called. And I particularly remember there's these wonderful interludes in the book which seem irrelevant at the time, but that turn out to be quite relevant. And in one of the books, the main character goes off and he learns how to weave and something else, and also pottery. And I remember that I went and learned pottery because of this book. And the fact that to have all that sort of making, like, it really showed me how, when you're looking at sort of a medieval world or whatever fantasy is generally set in, you don't tend to see things like that. You see, the warriors and the prince and princesses, and you don't tend to see people just doing ordinary everyday things like making stuff, like making clothing. And it was this wonderful richness in the book that I really, really enjoyed. It was like he'd gone off to a temple to learn meditation, and suddenly had all this wonderful revelations, except it was by weaving and doing pottery. It was really, really good. Okay, it's books that have influenced me as an author. There's a lot of them, a big list. Certainly Tolkien gave me the urge to want to create a world. I didn't necessarily want to take 9 years to invent a language and all that sort of stuff. I was a bit more impatient than that, but I just loved the idea of creating an entire world with all these different cultures and how they interact and things like that. And yeah, Tanith Lee has done some wonderful books. There's one called The Black Unicorn, where the character gets this little cat-like creature, but instead of that cat-like creature learns to talk. It's some sort of magical thing. It ends up being able to talk. But instead of it actually saying, "Oh, I'd like a cup of tea," which of course a cat wouldn't do, it would go, "Food, food, food, food," and do all the sorts of things that you expect a little animal like that to do. It wasn't, its motivations were the motivations of a cat. And I thought that's really actually quite clever, because it was still really fun to read without the cat actually saying, "I think you should go over there," or anything like that. And technically another book she wrote, which was Silver Metal Lover, and horrible spoiler here, but there's a character that dies in it, and it's absolutely devastating. First time a book ever made me cry, and it made me realize how potent that is to kill off a character. I hated her initially. So it was one of those things that you shouldn't do very often, but I never forgot that book, ever. And I actually met her at Welcome in Brighton some years back, and I told her about how that book made me cry, and she said, "Yeah, it makes a lot of people cry."
So is that something that you sometimes hear from your readers during the meetings, that, you know, I hate you for killing off my favorite character or something like that?
Yeah, but it's usually like, I hate you, but I love you as well. You know? I forgive you, but I kind of don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Star Wars before, and I know that it was also a big influence on you. But back then, when the movies came out, they were seen a bit as a boyish entertainment. So was it difficult for you to be a girl and a Star Wars fan at the same time?
Oh, not really. I don't think that it's the separation was so strong. But I do remember I was in primary school, so I would have been 10 or 10 or 11 or something like that when the second film came out. And I remember the boys loved to go down the back of the school where the oval was, and they would around pretending to be TIE fighters and you know, arms out like that. So I went down there and played with them pretending to be TIE fighters as well. And I thought I was the coolest girl in the school. And that's actually the point at which I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, as you do when you're a kid. That every time you become you know, inspired by something, you're gonna. At one stage, I wanted to be a potter. So it was probably not long after reading the Chronicles of Prydain. And I remember I told someone, a teacher or some adult, I told them this, and they said, why don't you write your ideas down? And that's, I think, where the writing started.
So if you had a chance to make a film out of one of your novels or short stories, which one would you pick first?
Oh, the Black Magician trilogy. Yeah, I think it's really suited, particularly to a first series or film, because a lot of the action is practicality wise, a lot of the action actually happens inside, like indoors, and that makes a very cheap production. There's not an awful lot of special effects that have to happen. Yeah.
Maybe now, when some new, like Netflix's TV stories, fantasy TV series like The Witcher gain international recognition and popularity, maybe it would be easier for other fantasy authors to make their books filmed.
Well, I did have last year. I had a few people get in contact with my film agent who were interested in doing exactly that, a series for Netflix. And then the coronavirus happened, and I haven't heard anything since. So. But I have had a filmmaker before get quite interested, and then it just sort of fizzles. It's one day the right thing is going to come along, and the planets will align and something will happen, I hope.
Yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I think it might be a bit far-fetched, but do you think that Harry Potter's success helped you to publish Black Magician's trilogy? As I think you had finished writing these books a long time before they were actually released.
It was interesting in that I think a couple of the books had been. No, I think my first book came out just prior, and I didn't hear about the Harry Potter books for a couple of years, and then someone said to me, "You've got to read these are great." So I read them, and I loved them, absolutely loved them. And then what I found was, once the books were published in the UK, because it was a few years between them being published in Australia and actually in the UK, that so many teachers and parents would email me and say, "Oh, thank you," because my kids would only read Harry Potter over and over and over and over again, and I needed something to get them to read something else. And your books just slotted in as that slightly older, you know, still in a magic school kind of thing. And it's interesting that a lot of people seem to think that I was inspired by Harry Potter, but the books had already been out.
And is it easy for you, after all those years, to find a spark in yourself to write another novel?
Yes, it's definitely there. I'm quite slow at writing now because of the physical problems with my neck and my hands. So, I mean, I could write for the rest of my life quite happily, but I have slowed down quite a bit. So we'll see.
And we got another question from a fan, Riot Girl 2005. Do you read reviews of your books?
Yes, but only because I'm looking for a little quotable. Even in bad reviews, you can often find really good little quotable things that can go on the book, you know. I don't. Okay, so I read them, but I don't take them to heart because, there's reviews have a function, and it's not for me; it's for the readers to let them know what someone else thought of a book. it's not actually a criticism of me. Like that, the function is not for me. It's actually for the readers. So I don't take them personally, even when they're bad. Sometimes they're bad in ways that make me laugh. But for every person who doesn't like it, there's going to be more that do. So I don't feel that every single person in the world must like my books.
Sure. So you never find like an interesting ideas in reviews that you think, okay, this guy might be right. Maybe in my next novel I will correct it or change it or something.
Yeah, it hasn't really happened yet. I suppose in some ways it's occasionally I might get an indication I'm being too repetitive a bit in a certain way. So I'm doing too much of one thing, so maybe I should mix it up. But yeah, I mean, I don't read Amazon reviews because you tend to get extremes. You get people who really love it so much that I think it can't possibly be that good, you know. And then you get ones that really scathing and I go, is it the same book that I wrote? Because I don't think that actually happened, you know. And I go, whatever. Okay, it's not for me. It's reviews are for readers. They're not for the author.
And do you have any professional routines and rules you have to follow to even begin thinking about writing and starting your workday?
Not necessarily rules. Basically, whatever works is on the table. What I do find is if I'm finding it hard to settle in to write, I have what I call the writing diaries. I have a separate file. And if something's on my mind, like I just can't quite get into it, I'll start writing in the writing diary. And usually I find what it is that's distracting me, get it off my chest. And next thing you know, I'm in the flow and I go back to the file and I continue to write. So that's a little tip that I'd give to writers if they find that they are a bit distracted by something and finding it hard to get into it. Just write about that, get it off your chest, go back to work.
And do you always write from home, or do you use computer? Do you use a typewriter? Do you write by hand? How do you write, and where do you write?
Oh, when I was about actually I won't mention my age. I had an Amiga. It was my very first computer, and I went from writing a couple of exercise book pages every time to write. Just exploded the moment I had a computer. And I can type faster than I can think. That was a revelation. And computer's always the format on which I will write. I may one day work out how to write by dictation and actually have it work. Sometimes I think it's my Australian accent. It just doesn't understand.
Really?
I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah.
And so I have one more question from a reader, Sky5271. Do you celebrate finishing a book somehow?
Yes, I have a philosophy of always having a bottle of really nice champagne in the fridge, and it's what I call my celebration or commiseration bottle. So if something good happens or something bad happens, it doesn't matter, I have champagne.
Not chocolate?
Oh, I'd eat chocolate all the time.
Yeah, I remember that you're a chocoholic. So.
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to save that for a special occasion. That's constant.
And one more question. I know that you are a huge fan of documentaries and non-fiction. So have you ever thought about writing a non-fantasy book set in so-called real world?
Not a non-fiction books as such, like the ones I like to read, but I have often thought of writing a craft book because I do a lot of weaving, and there's actually not a lot of books out there on the subject, and there are definitely holes that could be filled in specific areas of the craft. So I am quite tempted to write a weaving book one day, but I'll probably never get the time.
So the very last thing that I would like to ask you about your future plans. I know that you are not writing at the moment, but maybe you have some ideas in your mind that you are handpicking.
What I'd really like to do next is actually a collection of short stories and novellas. I've got about 10 of them that are already written and been published before, and I've got ideas for about another 10. So after once I've had a good long break and my hands and neck are starting to feel a bit better, then I'll start working on that next probably. At least I'll start by writing up a proposal and sending them to publishers and see if there's any interest. Obviously, if there's no interest, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But I would like to eventually have a collection out. There are a lot of there's a novella called The Mad Apprentice, which is set in the world of Kyralia. I've also written a story that's set about 5 years after the Traitor Queen. So yeah, there's stories that relate to the books I've got, and there's stories that are completely not related to them, and not even in fantasy, some of them. So
really?
It would be fun to get them out there.
Okay. All right, so so that would be it. Thank you very much for talking to us, because it's not only me behind
Thank you, everyone.
the screen. And hopefully we'll see you in Poland next year, maybe.
I would love to come. So, but you know, I'm not making any guarantees at the moment. We'll just have to see what happens.
Sure. Yeah. So take care and stay safe.
You too.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You too, and everyone.